Yo guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are doing fantastic as usual. So I'm very happy to see that we have reached 10 subscribers already. I would have never thought that when I started this channel that we would reach that so quickly. And we are going to be implementing some storage today. I think the last two episodes were a bit too long, in fact. I think it's better to keep them kind of short and actually just focus on one concept at a time so that you can go back and just watch the video in its full. So you might not have the time to watch a 1 hour video from start to finish. So I think it's actually good to keep it somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes. So in this video, we are going to be implementing some storage for our application. So it's kind of important that you're able to actually save some of the tasks that you're creating. So currently, when we reload the page, none of this is persisted, and that is kind of a shame. So we're going to be looking at two ways where we could save this data. So we have this items array. That's what we're going to be focusing this on, because this is the items array that we're using to run the whole application on really. So we're going to be looking at ways to store this data in a way that we can use it and import it again later when we load the page or by a button or something. So we're going to be looking at two things. We're going to be looking at local storage. So local storage is the browser's built-in storage. So this is where you can save a key value pair. So these key value pairs are string to string. So you put a string as a key, just like we have this unique identifier. We have a string as our key, and then we have a string as our value. So that is kind of powerful because you can put any kind of string here. So we're going to put something like to-do items, and then we're going to put a JSON representation of our array. So if you don't know about JSON, it is super important that you learn this, because this is probably the most well-used and well-known format between all kinds of APIs and all kinds of systems. So it's super important to learn about JSON. But if you're coming from JavaScript, you probably know it already. It's just, the way of creating an object in JavaScript is super similar. The only main difference that I can think of really, so if we have this array here, the only real difference is probably that you have like double quotes around the key, but otherwise it's pretty similar. So you would have something like an array, like an object, and then you do something like key value, and you can also have key as a number. You can have some key with a number here. You could also have another array, of course, or an object. So that is about it, but feel free to read the spec somewhere and see exactly all of the possibilities with JSON. But I think I might have missed something maybe, so feel free to check that up. So it's super important that you learn JSON because it's used everywhere when it comes to web development and software development in general. So we're going to be implementing that. So we're going to be saving this into our local storage. An only important thing to think about now is when are we going to be saving it, because it kind of depends. Either you have like a button so you can press like save changes, but I'm not a big fan of that user experience. Often, in fact, I actually kind of think the more modern approach is just to auto-save it. So whenever we do an action that actually modifies the data, such as editing, such as creating a new task or something like that, then we save it. So we save it automatically. The user doesn't have to worry about any of that going on in the background. They can do whatever with their tasks and they will be persisted. So that's kind of the approach I'm going to be taking here. So what kind of events do we have? Well, we have creation. We want to save that new item that was created. And we also have this title that we implemented. So whenever this changes, I think we're going to be doing this when we focus out. So you can see we're currently focusing on this span here, this text here. But when we focus out, we want to save that. So you could also do it on every single keystroke, but I think that is a bit too much. It's a bit overkill. But of course, if you're if you really want to make sure that this is being saved, then of course you can do that as well. And then we're going to be doing it in this edit dialog, of course. So whenever you save this edit, we're going to be saving it to local storage as well. And then we're going to do it on delete as well. So I think that's about it. So that's kind of the functionalities that actually modify this array here. So we're going to be starting out by creating a function for saving to local storage. And it's super easy once you get this going. So save to local storage. So we're going to be defining that function there. And what do we want to do here? We want to set an item in local storage. And the way to access local storage is by using the window objects. This is the global variable window, and that is kind of the background processes. You know, you might have the document. The document is more what is being rendered on the screen, but the window is more of the background, behind the scenes stuff. So that's where local storage is. So local storage, then set item. You can see set item. We're going to be using set item and get item. We can also use clear in some cases. But we're just going to be using set item here. So set item and give it a name, something like to do items. And this is also local to the page. So this item is based on the domain, I think here. So you cannot access, you know, local storage of other sites. That would of course be the biggest security vulnerability of mankind. But you can just set it for this page. So to do items, something that is unique to your site that you're not using somewhere else. So set that, and then we want to get the JSON representation of the object. And how do we do that? There's a really handy function in JavaScript that is called stringify. So this creates a JSON string from any kind of object. So we're going to be stringifying the items array here to make it a string, which is appropriate because we can see here in the set item that the key is a string and also the value is a string. So that should be all for saving to local storage. Now we need to bind this. We need to call this function whenever we make a modification to the items array. So how are we going to do that? I think we're going to be creating some event dispatchers, our beloved event dispatchers. So we already have kind of some function here. We have this on task edit save. We can do it here, of course. So whenever you save an item here, you want to save that change to local storage as well. So that should be one case covered, and then we want to do it on deletion. So I think we have that here. So we want to handle that here. I think I actually did this, but yeah, so this is what you want to be doing at least. So you want to create an event dispatcher just like we've done 100 times, and then dispatch that delete event. Whenever you delete an item, you want to know about it in the parent component. So in this case here, so on delete, we want to bind that here. So on delete, save to local storage. So whenever you delete an item, we should also save that to local storage. And then we got the two cases covered. So now we want to do it on creation. And then we have to create another event dispatcher, of course. So let's copy that code here. Let's import it as well. So there we go. Now here we want to call that dispatch function to dispatch that we created a new item. So that should be it. And then we also want to bind to this event here. So let's see, it's in the to do item create. So on create, then we want to save that to local storage as well. So now we only really have one case left, I think. Yeah, so that is the name editing, and that is kind of interesting because, like I said, you probably want to do this on focus out. So whenever you stop focusing on this element, when you click somewhere else on the page, you want to save this. It depends on your application. Maybe you're really critical that you save it for on every keystroke, but for our case, we're just gonna be doing it on focus out. So it's actually called something like blur in JavaScript, that event. So let's go here and bind it. So on blur, that is the name for the event whenever you focus out on something on the page. So on blur, we want to dispatch. So I think we'll probably create a function for this. So on title blur or something like that. And then we want to notify with an event dispatcher, of course. So we copy that here. Dispatch here. So dispatch title change. Then we can do on title blur here. So that should be it. And import that as well. There we go. And now we need to remember to do this in to-do items as well. So we can just do some like event forwarding, which we learned. So this forwards it to the parent component. We don't have to bind it here because we're not going to be changing or doing anything to the event. So it just passes it on to the parent component again. So that is in our case app.svelte. So here we can actually bind it to it, of course. So on title change, then we want to save to local storage. So let's see if that works. Let's add some tasks. So hello world, let's go. So you can probably open your browser in your dev tools. It should be Control-Shift-I on both Firefox and Chrome, I think, but you can find it in some menu, I guess. So you should probably find it under something like storage or application in Chrome, I think. So here we have local storage, and there we go. So there we have this JSON string here. So let's see, it contains both of the objects that we created. Now we want to see if we edit this here, does it save? So let's save that there, and let's see here. So yeah, it actually saved that. Really nice. Now we also want to do it for deletion. Let's see if that worked. And it did. So it removed it. Length is now 1. And then the editing of the name here. So let's see if that works. And it did. It seems like it did. At least, yeah, it did. So that should be every case covered, right? We got creation, edit here, and edit title, and then deletion. So now we're actually saving everything to local storage. So all that remains here is just whenever the app loads, we want to load it back into this items array. So it's super simple. We just load back into this. It currently has like a default empty array, but we actually gonna be using something called a lifecycle hook. So whenever this method here we put a callback function inside of this. So this is kind of telling Svelte, hey, whenever this component mounts, we want to run a certain function, which is the function, this anonymous function that we're creating here. So whenever this component is added or first rendered, the first time it is being rendered on the DOM, then we want to run a function, and that is loading the items. So to get an item, we need to do something like to do items is window.localStorage get item. So let's use that. We could probably like create a constant variable so we don't mess up with the name here. We can do that later as best practice. And this can also be null. So what if we load this page without ever setting it? Then of course this will be null because we haven't set it yet. So we need to make sure that it's not null. Then we want to return here, of course. Return early is best practice. And then we want to parse this JSON string that we have here in local storage. So there's actually a function for that as well, but we need to be careful here because whatever we put here could actually be wrong. It could be, it could be an invalid JSON string. So we need to wrap this in a try catch to make sure that we're catching the error and making sure that application doesn't crash. So I don't think we can actually specify a type for this exception, but we can just log it to the console, I guess. So console log that. And then we want to, in here, then of course, parse it. So data here, we map that to task array. That is the type we want to parse. Then we do JSON.parse to do items. And that should be it. Then we also, of course, assign to the items variable. So assign that to data. And there we go. When I reloaded that, it already shows. So there we go. Let's try to add some tasks. Let's see if that works. So if I change this to 1, I change this to 3 and reload, that seems to work. I delete these 2 items here and reload, that seems to work. I can edit this task here as well, and that changed there. So there we go, local storage implemented. Isn't that amazing? That was really quick, super easy, with Svelte being really helpful. So now we're going to look at the second option, which is saving to a file. So that is kind of interesting. It depends on your application if you want to have this, but this is mainly maybe for privacy. If you don't want to have everything on like a remote server, you could actually just save it on the user's computer, and then they could like import the file into your application and use it from there. So that's kind of nice. That's a nice way of doing things. It's a different approach. So if you're making this as a business, maybe that is what you want to do. Maybe that is your goal. So we're going to be looking at that as well. So let's actually create a new component for this. I'm imagining like a save button, a save input field where you can like put the file name, and then also like an input type field. So there's actually like a built-in way to load files in the browser. So the user can upload a file, but we're not going to be uploading it to the server. We're just going to uploading it to the clients, so that Svelte can load the data from it. So let's create a new component here. We're going to create a new folder actually. So let's call it something like file, and then we'll call it task IO or something. So this will be like task input output for loading that. So maybe we can call it like task file IO or something. So we're even more clear what the intended purpose is. And in here we want to have like an input type text, which is for specifying the file name, and then we want to have a button as well, so we can like click that whenever we want to save it. So save file, maybe a placeholder as well, so file name. Then let's render it in app.svelte as well, so we can do that. Task file IO, and there we go. So maybe we want to have some styling to that, make it sure it looks good. So let's use our beloved isolated CSS, of course. So divider here, and then we do some margin top. There we go, that looks pretty decent. And then we also want to do something like an input type file. So we're probably going to be doing something like BR here. This is really bad practice, but we're going to change it later. It's just for creating like a line break here so that we can put it on a new line. We could just wrap this in a div, but then we kind of get a problem with the isolated CSS. So we're just going to do it like this. We're going to change it later. So input type file actually creates like a file uploader. I'm sure you have seen it before if you ever used your internet. So this is where you can click this button and it will open a file dialog where you can select a file. So we're going to be looking at this saving to file first. It should be pretty straightforward. So you probably want to have some logic here, some TypeScript or JavaScript maybe. Let's create a function called save here, and then we bind this button to that. So on click save. And then I think we also want to be passing in this items array here as a prop. So we kind of got that theme going here because we have on here, we're binding it here, we're binding it in to-do items, we're kind of binding it everywhere. So let's actually be consistent here and do that binding here as well. So let's copy that from to-do item create. That should be fine. Let's give it a default value as well and import everything. There we go, and then we want to bind it here as well, of course. So bind items. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so now we actually want to save this, and we're gonna be using the same function here to stringify it. So let's create a string here. So string is JSON.stringify items, then we got a string. So now how do we download this? This is actually rather interesting, and it's kind of weird because there's kind of security measures in your browser to make sure you're not downloading anything unwanted, anything you didn't intend to download. So it's kind of hard to do this programmatically without the user interacting, but we kind of have an interaction. It's just that it's kind of layered like a proxied, but we're actually going to be doing something strange here. We're going to be using the vanilla API here to create a new element, because that's how you do it. And I think there exists some newer modern approaches which have a native file dialog for saving, but they are kind of too recent. I don't think they are supported in even Firefox, which I am using. So it's kind of tough right now, but in the future, if we can see that it has matured well enough, then of course we will be using that more mature and best practice APIs. So the way to do this is actually by creating like an anchor tag. So just like a link. So whenever you click a link, you can actually specify it to download whatever you have in your href. So if you have like a normal href to whatever link you want to have on your page, you can actually make it download a file as well. So you can do something like this, I think. So create a new element. It's just vanilla API. So document create element. We specify the tag name, which is an anchor event, and then we want to specify the href here. So this would be like a link, but it's actually going to be linking to some data. So I think the syntax is something like this. So let's actually search it up here. So HTML a link data. So data link the HTML elements with a data attribute. I think we don't want to do that. So let's see here. Yeah, so this is the way to do it. Yeah, so here you can specify the data and then you specify the MIME type. So this kind of just tells the browser what file it is downloading. So that is kind of the purpose, especially if you have like file previews. If you want the browser to preview a file, maybe you have like a PDF and you want it to show it in the PDF viewer or something like that. So I don't think it actually matters what this is, but we're gonna be using the right MIME type, of course. So I think we can do something like this. So application.json, I think that is the MIME type for JSON. And then we specify the actual data, I think, here. So we can actually specify this string here. So let's use some templating here to make it look a bit better. And we can specify the string here. Let's see if that works. And then I think also you need to make sure this is downloading. So I think it's something like a.download, and that should be, this is where you specify the file name, I think. So then we need to have this file name, so let's create a variable for that. So file name string and bind to that as well. So bind value here to file name. Now we want to download that as the file name here. So let's see if that works. Now we have this data here, and let's see if we can save this to a file. So items.json, save file. That did not seem to work. No errors in the code. Or are we calling it? Oh yeah, okay. So we also need to programmatically click this anchor here. So that is kind of interesting. We can actually click an element by calling the click function here. So let's see if that worked now. So items.json, save file, and there it actually downloaded something. So opening up this now, it actually seems like it worked. But for some reason, this actually has, there's something strange with this file here. I think maybe I made a mistake. Because it's missing some of the beginning here of this JSON. Maybe let's try again. So items3.json. Yeah, so I'm definitely doing something wrong here, because let's Google it up. I'm just doing this from my brain, from my memory. So HTML programmatically save file. So to generate and save a file, and you do set it something like this. Okay, maybe we need to set the char set as well. I don't think that is necessary, but okay, I guess maybe we have to specify like a dot here. I'm not sure, but let's just use the char set as well. I don't think it matters that much. Let's see if that works then. So items.json, items4.json, save to file. And there we go. That actually seems to work much better. So that is definitely the way to do it. Just Google if you are unsure, of course. So now we have saved this to a file. Now we also want to add the ability to upload a file. So whenever you click this button and select a file, we want to import that and parse that JSON into our items array here. So we're going to be binding this. I think there's actually something like files property. Oh, not that one. So bind files here. I think files. Yeah, I think that is right. Let's create a variable, something like import files, and this is a file list if I'm not mistaken. So we're binding this variable files, we're binding this variable import files here, just so that we can get the files. So this is just like we're binding a value on this input, we're actually binding files instead of a value to get the file list. So now we're going to be doing something different, which I have not shown yet. There's actually kind of a special syntax when it comes to reactivity within TypeScript here. So within these script tags, there's a way to create some reactivity. So whenever any of these variables changes, when we have this reactivity, we can actually call a function. So this is kind of interesting. I've not shown this yet. So it's kind of mind-blowing because it works in very many cases where you want to have this kind of reactivity. So let's do something like on files changed. Then of course you can also use like an on change event. So I think there's actually an on change event that is being called whenever that changes. Maybe that is best practice, but I really want to show you guys this one right here. So on files changed, let's do something like file list. So the way to do this is actually by using a dollar sign and then a colon, and then you specify like an expression that you want to be reactive. So in our case, we want on files to be reactive. So this will be calling the function, and here we specify variables. Whenever you write any variable here, I think they will actually cause this function to be reactive since they change. If they change, they will actually, rerun the function. And this can also be null. So in our case, this will be undefined or something in the first run. So this will need to make sure that it's not null, of course. So let's see if that works. Let's just console log that and let's select the file. So I selected that items4 file, and that actually seemed to work. So whenever that variable changes, whenever import file variable changes, we actually run this function. So I think we could just achieve the same result with an on change event here, but I just wanted to show you guys this really neat feature of Svelte that I'm probably gonna be using a lot in these series as well. So let's just use here the extreme amazing power of Svelte and really appreciate and love Svelte for what it is. So this function is called whenever import files changes. Isn't that amazing? So now we can actually access this file list here. I think you can actually select like multiple files in some of these inputs, but we're just interested in the first here. So I think we're going to just treat this like an array. Let's see if we can do that. Yeah, so that seems to work. We get the file here. So we're actually going to be using something called like a file reader. I'm not really sure. So file reader MDN. So we're actually going to be using this to read the data of the file. In fact, the JSON string inside of the file so that we can parse it. So I'm not really sure how this works from the top of my mind. So let's see here. I think we want to use read as text here. So let's see if we have any guides here, any examples. Maybe this here, using files from web applications. Let's see here. So yeah, so they're using like an input change event, but we want to actually get the data from the event. So let's see, showing file sizes. Maybe we can read it, file reader. Let's see if that is being used. Yeah, there we go. So we're gonna be using this thing, I think. So we're gonna be creating this new file reader object here, and let's indent that properly. So there's actually a callback function here, because so loading a file is of course async, because loading a large file could take a long time. So of course it's async. So I think we can actually get the data here as a result. We need to make sure that we're using the right method here to read here. So just like we saw here, there's some methods here like read as array buffer, read as binary string. But of course we want to use read as text because we have a JSON string inside of it. So let's just use read as text. So let's read that file, and that should be, yeah, so files at 0. And let's see here. So let's just console log that. And let's try that out. And there we go. There we got our JSON string. Isn't that amazing? So now, just like we do in here in app.svelte, we just want to parse this and set the variable. So we can just copy this, I think. So I think we just have to change it a little bit, but I think that should be fine. So we need to parse e.target.result. Maybe, I don't remember what it was. File reader. eTarget result, yes. So eTarget result, and that should be the same thing. Okay, so this we actually need to make sure here that this is a string. I'm not sure why, because it's always reading as text, but let's just do a type check here. I think we're gonna do something like type of equals string and make sure that it's true. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, so maybe we need to bind this to a variable, of course. So result, or rather, we want to make sure it's not, if it's not a string, then we want to return, of course. So let's just do that, see if that made TypeScript happy. Yeah, that seems to do the trick. So that should be the same thing, really. So let's see if that works. Let's try deleting these items and see if we can restore them from our saved JSON. So let's just reload here and select that file. And there we go. Now we have implemented file saving. Isn't that amazing? So we're just deleting some files, editing some tasks, and let's try to save it. So save.json and save that file. Yeah, and then of course we need to delete some so that we can see the result. And there we go. Isn't that amazing? Now we have implemented local storage file saving and actual local, locally saving the files. So saving the files down to the user's computer. Isn't that amazing? I hope you guys liked this shorter episode. I tried to be as concise as possible so we didn't lose too much focus. So there we go. We have some persistence going. Now we're really seeing our application take some shape, some form. So in the next episode, like I promised in the last episode, we actually need to implement that completed here. So that is super important of our to-do application, that you can actually complete a task. Otherwise, what is the point of a to-do application? Isn't that kind of the point of a to-do application, to get that satisfying feeling when you check off a task and get all kinds of animations? Well, maybe not all kinds of animations, but some amazing animations to show you, hey, you did a great job. So that's what we're going to be looking at in the next episode. And maybe we will also be looking at some styling. So it kind of looks a bit dull right now. We might actually start to venture a bit into styling. We're not going to style way too much, but just get a feel for it. So it kind of looks a bit bare bones at the moment. So just upping the design a little bit could actually give it a bit more character, make us love it a bit more, and make us want to work on it a bit more. So I think it's important to not make it look too bad, So let's add some style to it in the next episode. So thank you guys a lot for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.